Having a learning disability and nearly failing third grade. And the teacher told my parents that if I couldn't read by the last 2 months, I would be held back. So I memorized the homework. So it took me years to catch up. But the flip side of dyslexia is you're not limited by paradigms and borders. And so I always was alert to things like deja vu, to other things, to synchronicity, that things happened that just were beyond mere chance. At age 5, I intervened in my own terrorizing dream that was happening night after night when I would jump from a railroad trestle because I couldn't hold on for any longer. And I finally decided this was terrible. I'm just going to jump. And with that, that was the end of that dream and that torment. And so I've had other interesting situations, and I would meet interesting people and know that they were informative and helpful to me. And even as a physician, I realized that learning was not so rigorous because it always had to be adaptive, and that certain things happened and you could learn from others after you eliminated your own prejudgment about them. So for years, I would collect people's reports to me and stick them in a drawer. So it mounted up to about 950. And then with the beginning of COVID and all of the haranguing about death, over and over death, besides COVID and dying and the opioids, the suicides, the car act, I said, this is kind of ridiculous. Let's get the death out of the practicality. So I took the 140 of my best stories, what people had seen of their loved ones primarily, asleep, awake, levitating, near death, what people's last words in coma were before they passed, 11 celebrities, my own stories, which was everything short of a near-death experience. And then I stumbled at the end on what the common threads were. And that is probably the most remarkable part of the book, is what does it mean to someone who's had an experience, and what does it mean to someone who has never had an experience? How can that enrich their lives? I start off with a prologue that I'm climbing a mountain and racing up to be the first one in my camp group at age 9. And I come to a deep crevasse. And I'm nervous about it, but I still want to be first. So as I jump, I see my life go in front of me like a spool of film. And I knew it was my life. And from then on, I knew that many of these little pieces were part of something that Jung would describe as connections to previous lives, previous experiences, etc. And I guess it all deals with consciousness, where consciousness truly abides, and is it only in the body? One of my theses is the obvious one, that the brain is not hardwired for this extrasensory stuff. It's connected to the 5 senses, and 90% of the brain is sensory, and only 10% is motor, because it's geared for surveillance and survival. And that survival makes us so prejudicial on what we think we know and sort of sticking to it. But only when the portal is open by the dream, by the hallucinatory event, and most radically by an out-of-body experience, do you realize that consciousness can reside outside the body. How can a lady 20 years after her near-death experience tell me verbatim her story when she can't remember where she just put her keys? One of the best ways to tell people stories is to use narratives. I mean, that's historically the way mankind passed on great epic poems. And to let people draw their own conclusions. I just report what they said, whether it's angels, tunnels, white light, etc. And then it's sort of embellished by the um, 11 celebrities who took it to heart and changed their lives. And my people were just ordinary people who often never shared this with anybody, including their spouse. And they had these extraordinary events and had a change in their life because of them. Year-old lady wakes up at 3 in the morning. She usually sleeps till 7, doesn't go downstairs till 7. She wakes up at 3, goes downstairs, and there is her deceased husband sitting at the head of the dinner table. And she says, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I came to tell you I will always be watching you and I love you," and disappears. Well, she can't go back to bed after that. So she's rumbling around the kitchen at 7 in the morning. Her son calls, this is from Wilmington. Her son calls from Baltimore and says, "Mom, you'll never believe who I saw at 3 in the morning." I have a 98-year-old lady who's very positive, whose mother died at 2, when she was 2, from typhoid. And the aunt who took her in, I guess, managed to remove all photographs of the mother. And at age 6, this lady remembers in a dream, she sees a woman, blonde, frail, long pink dress, walk out of a grave from behind a tombstone and walk towards her. And she said, "Who are you?" And the lady says, "I'm your mother." And says, "What are you doing here?" Says, "I'm here to tell you if you ever need anything, call me." And she says, "But you're dead. You can call me. I have 2 other stories like that." I would say that most of us, whether we realize it or not, are both a teacher and a student. And we don't know where we're going to learn something. And the secret is to leave it as a possibility. And leave it as a possibility and see what happens to you, or what you hear, or what your family hears. And when people are in mourning, etc., they're most vulnerable and they may very well share stories. And this all came out of perhaps my empathic nature, in which I would get into people's grief, which is not a normal physician, because most of the time they recoil from it, they switch subjects, "We're sorry to hear it," and they stay on the basic matter. But this is essential to humanity. And I was not meant to be a physician. I was, as dyslexic, I would drop the dishes and my parents would call me, "Rob, you're the brain surgeon." And if it wasn't bad enough to have that moniker, they told their friends that Rob is the brain surgeon. So at age 16, when I had a choice of professions, my father said, "Well, you can do something beside architecture." I said, "What do you suggest?" He said, "You could be a lawyer." I said, "I don't know any of your friends who are lawyers I like." He said, "You can be a doctor." Bingo. 5 seconds. That was it. I was going to show them. And from the medical piece, I learned the rigor and the discipline. From the humanitarian piece, I didn't leave that. That people were people and not diagnoses. And so you just never know when people surprise you.